Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and when we last left Hill, he had just fought off the Union troops attempting to exploit the gap in his line at the crater. We pick up with the siege of Petersburg, continuing into the fall of 1864. The day after the successful defense of the crater, Lee held church service at his headquarters, with Reverend General William Pendleton conducting the service. Hill and Lee sat together, and during the service a small dog came up to the two generals, who gladly played with the rambunctious puppy while Pendleton preached. As both sides settled in for a siege, Hill complained to Confederate government officials about the putrid meat supplied to his corps, but the commissaries could do very little about the condition of the food. Hill attempted to keep his troops battle-ready despite the horrendous state of its supplies and the sad fact that desertion ran rampant through the whole army. In August, Grant launched another assault against the railroads south and southwest of Petersburg. Hill maneuvered his outnumbered troops effectively and thwarted multiple exploratory advances by the Union Army on the Weldon Railroad. Still, the Union Army persisted and held on to that railroad. Grant lost 4,455 of 20,000 men engaged over the course of the four-day fight, and Lee lost 1,600 of the 14,000 engaged, numbers the Confederate Army could not afford. On August 25th, Lee maneuvered Hill's troops out of the entrenchments of Petersburg to attack the famed 2nd Corps of the Army of the Potomac with Winfield Scott Hancock at its head, who was ripping up large sections of the Weldon Railroad around Reams Station. Hill's troops outnumbered Hancock, and the unsuspecting Federals became easy prey for the Virginian. Using a combination of infantry and cavalry to attack Hancock from the south in order to grab the Union general's attention, Hill would then launch his main assault against Hancock's poorly placed works. Before he could order the assault, the pain in his kidneys and prostate forced Hill to lay down within sight of the Union earthworks, and he turned over the attack to Wilcox. The failed attack by Wilcox convinced Hill to put Heath in charge of the next attack, with Hill taking a supervisory role as his ailment would allow. Pegram's artillery preempted the attack, and Union soldiers felt the devastation. One soldier stated that the artillery bombardment turned their earthworks into kindling wood. Then the Confederate infantry made their attack, which swept over the Union earthworks and disintegrated the Federal Corps. Of the 2,700 casualties, 2,150 had surrendered on the field. Hill had followed Lee's directive to punish the enemy. Hill stated, "The saber and the bayonet have shaken hands on the enemy's captured breastworks." One of Hill's biographers stated of the Battle of Reams Station that it was a contest led by the Powell Hill of old, troops marching swiftly, falling on the enemy before he could be reinforced, attacking at the right place with sufficient numbers, hammering to a clear-cut victory. All of this worked at Reams Station because Hill was operating on the level where he was at his best, division command. He was incapacitated during part of the battle, but the overall scenario was his, and he directed the action with the same deft touch that had brought him into prominence early in the war. The main question for Hill now was whether his health would become a serious impediment. In September, Hill's spirits rose when Dolly and the children moved into the house across the road from his headquarters. He was in a generally good mood around this time. He laughed at William Pegram's news that the people of Richmond expected to evacuate soon. One day when riding through camp, he saw a chaplain handing out religious tracts. He reined his horse and asked the chaplain, "Do you think the boys would prefer hardtack or soft tracks?" At the end of September, Grant again extended his lines further to the west, and Lee again went to meet him in battle with Hill. Hill gained some success, but over the course of 2 days could do nothing more than slow down the Union advance, being greatly outnumbered. In mid-October, Lee wrote to Hill, "I wish you would see that all extra-duty men in all the departments, wagoners, cooks, clerks, couriers, and etc., that can possibly be spared be placed in the ranks, that all the reserves, militia, and etc. around Petersburg be put in the trenches, and that as many of your old troops as you think it safe to take out be held in readiness for field service. We must drive them back at all costs." At a dinner party that offered a little reprieve from the war weariness, the discussion centered around the northern presidential election. Hill stated he would rather McClellan win the election, because if it becomes necessary to surrender, I would prefer to do so to McClellan. At the end of October, Grant again struck to the southwest of Petersburg, this time attempting to sever the Boydton Plank Road. Hill used the divisions of Wilcox, Heath, and Wade Hampton's cavalry to isolate the force under 2nd Corps Commander Winfield Scott Hancock after General Warren's 5th Corps Division got separated and entangled in a swamp. Heath's division struck Hancock's men so hard that it sent the Federals into a withdrawal. Hill's troops were too few in number to deal any devastating blow, but the quick movements and hard-hitting style of Hill's division commanders forced the Union troops to give up on the small campaign. In the fight, Wade Hampton lost a son, and Hill sent him a note reading, "My dear General, I take the liberty of writing to you to express my deep sympathy with you in the end of your noble boy, and my earnest desire, were such a thing possible, to alleviate your grief. Any assistance which I can give you in forwarding your wishes in any way, please do not hesitate to call upon me. With great sympathy, being truly your friend, A.P. Hill." After the fight for the Boydton Plank Road, both armies settled in for winter. Hill spent as much time as possible with Dolly and the children, getting frequent visits by General Lee. Dolly wrote, "General Lee comes very frequently to see me. He is the best and greatest man on earth. Brought me the last time some delicious apples." Surprising to Lee, Grant launched another offensive against the Weldon Railroad with Warren's 5th Corps. Lee pulled Hill's corps out of their Petersburg entrenchments and sent them after Warren, but Hill arrived too late. The freezing weather that slowed down his march convinced Warren, after successfully destroying a large section of the railroad, to pull back. Hill wrote to his sister, "Dolly and the children are with me, and we are just as comfortable as people can expect to be in these times. The children are growing so rapidly, doing so well. Russie is as fat as a butterball and the greatest talker you ever saw. And your little namesake, Lucy Lee, is certainly the sweetest little cherub ever born, gentle and genial as a May morning, and easily managed. I have just returned from the hardest trip I have ever had, down the railroad after Warren. I could not succeed in bringing him to fight, though I marched 40 miles one day and night. We succeeded, however, in turning him back from Weldon. Our army here, as always, is ready to do its duty, and men and officers in good spirits. I suppose now we shall, in addition to Grant, have Sherman on our hands too. Well, the Army of Northern Virginia is equal to it, and however much you tax its powers, will always respond, and I hope successfully." Hill attempted to hide his deteriorating health, but those around him saw its destructiveness. Protracted urinary and kidney infections had now progressed into uremia. Swollen kidneys, flank pain, inability to urinate, drowsiness from taut nerves, and lack of sleep all were making Hill increasingly lethargic. One of his staffers described him as an invalid. Hill's corps was whittling away as the winter months made it more difficult to get provisions and pay became irregular. The Tennessee Brigade dropped down to just 300 men. In February, Grant made another attack on the Boydton Plank Road, where Hill rushed Mahone's division to hold off the Confederate forces being routed there. The Blue troops threw up breastworks to guard their newly acquired ground. On March 20th, Hill gave in to demands by staffers and friends to take a sick furlough. He, Dolly, and the children went to Chesterfield County to stay at the home of his uncle Henry Hill. His uncle held a position in the Confederate Paymaster Department, and after a week of rest, accompanied his uncle on a trip to the department. He chatted with people there and mentioned that he did not wish to survive the fall of Richmond if the city was ordered to evacuate. On March 31st, Hill returned to duty in command of the 3rd Corps, although he was not well. Rumors swirled around Richmond that Grant planned another major assault, and Hill wanted to command his troops in the struggle. On April 1st, Hill wheeled himself into the saddle and remained there for 15 hours, checking on his lines. The men in battle lines stood yards apart, but Hill inspected them nonetheless. When darkness came, Hill was exhausted, in great pain, and running a fever. That night he went to the cottage where his wife and children remained. That day George Pickett's force got shattered at Five Forks, and now Lee's entire right flank was gone. Grant now prepared for a final assault. Hill couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, seeking relief from pain, exhaustion, fever, and worry. The sound of cannon fire rolled across the sky like waves of thunder. Bright darts of light from Union artillery outlined treetops and the horizon to the east, south, and west. As hard as he tried, Hill could not steer his mind away from the stark reality that all was coming to an end. Even a nap was out of the question. Hill gingerly eased himself out of bed and dressed. For some reason, he donned a white linen shirt that the now pregnant Dolly had recently made for him. Around 3 in the morning, Hill walked across the road to his headquarters tent. Sunday, April 2nd, would be a clear and warm day.